My name is Tom Noonan. I'm from the United States. I work for United Parachute Technologies, for UPT, for Bill Booth. Prior to that, I had the opportunity to work for Performance Designs. Worked with John LeBlanc and Albert downstairs in the venue area. I've seen a lot of different parachute designs over the last 20 years. I've done some product testing for different parachutes. I've landed parachutes as high as 17,200 feet MSL above sea level and as low as sea level. Anywhere in between. I've landed parachutes as large as 600 square feet and as small as 90 square feet at these varying different altitudes. So based on that background and that experience, I wanted to put all this information together and to offer some questions and offer some thoughts for you guys as your 2016 season of skydiving is about to begin. And go on. My theme for this is the world is your drop zone. So that's me. I'm landing. It's about 4,000 feet MSL. It's not too high. That's in the Western Himalaya. I'm jumping a Storm 120, my favorite parachute that I've ever owned. I always said if I ever left Performance Designs, the one parachute I would want with me is a Storm 120 because it fits all the different types of skydiving that I do, and it's the perfect size for me for both going fast and also going slow when I want to. But enough about me. What I want to look at here is why is this such an important topic? The reason why understanding our canopy choices is such an important topic is that in today's modern environment of skydiving, if you are injured skydiving, if you're unfortunate enough to suffer an injury in our sport today, chances are it will be canopy related. Okay? Take a moment and think about that for a moment. In the 70s and 80s and even into the early 90s, the actual products, the harness containers, the parachutes, the materials, were kind of dangerous and kind of scary, right? And a lot of accidents were equipment related. Rings were bending, risers were failing, all kinds of equipment related issues that were injuring skydivers and possibly killing them. Today, however, because of the advancements in technology, the testing, the materials available to us, the engineering behind the gear, we have really well-made equipment with a very low malfunction rate. So in theory, we should have a lower incident rate. Would you agree with that? If basic math, if we have safer gear, we should have less incidents. But the reality is we're not. And we actually call that Booth's Law number 2, for those of you that know Bill Booth. The safer we make the equipment, the more dangerous the mindset becomes, not just in high performance turns, but also in the acceptance of risk, not necessarily using the right parachute for the right type of skydive. Those types of decisions increase the incident rate, which keeps our incident rate, unfortunately, high. So over the next 45 to 50 minutes, I'm going to be here this afternoon with you guys to give you some ideas, some things to think about with the current parachutes that you're currently jumping. And if you're purchasing new parachutes, some thoughts on new parachutes. So hopefully, when you leave here, you'll have a better understanding of why you're flying the parachutes you're flying, whether or not they're the right ones or possibly the wrong ones for you. And if you find yourself in the market for a newer used parachute in the future, you'll have questions you can ask yourself before you make that purchase to help you identify if this is really the right parachute for you. So here are some of the causes for concern. We talked about the injury rate. We're going to talk about the evolution of canopy possibilities. 30 years ago, you had a couple of options. You had a main and a reserve. They were both square. They both looked the same, and they both pretty much perform the same. But today we have over 30 different types and models of parachutes. We've got over 30 different sizes per parachute, so there's hundreds of choices of parachutes today. And each one of us has a best choice and a worst choice. And most of us are probably flying somewhere in between. So today we're going to kind of shed light on that. And the last thing I like to point out here is that oftentimes when we find ourselves with the wrong parachute, it's by no fault of our own. We become victim of the great deal canopy. How many skydives do you have?
800.
800, okay. I have a Petra 67 for sale for only $1,000. You want to buy it?
Deal.
You're not ready for it today, but it's a great deal. So what do? You buy it, you stick it in your closet. I'm only going to jump it when I'm ready. But now can't afford to skydive. You just bought another parachute. But if I sell the Katana that I'm currently jumping, or the Sabre 2 I'm currently jumping, now I can afford to skydive again. So I end up selling the Sabre 2. Next thing you know, the Peregrine or the Petra is in there, and now we've made a bad canopy choice. Call that the great deal canopy problem. You end up getting a deal on a parachute that's not ready for you, not right for you, you're not ready for it, but you buy it anyway, and you tell yourself, I'll wait. But the reality is, you won't wait. You put that new parachute in, and you end up getting injured. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question by a show of hands. How many of you feel today, with the current parachute in your harness container, that you could land your main parachute safely in a backyard if you had to? Okay, good. A lot of hands are going up. That's awesome. And I also appreciate the hands that aren't going up. This is an honest discussion. If you're not comfortable that you can't land your main canopy today in a backyard, remember that. Keep note of that, okay? For those of you that are confident you can land your main parachute in a backyard today, under the conditions we present, ask yourself this: are you sure? Are you confident you can do it? It's not just being able to do it, knowing you can do it, but are you confident? Do you have the belief system in the currency that you can? Because we're all going to answer yes, hopefully, but some of us, like this guy, might be wrong. All right, next question. What about your reserve parachute? Can you land your reserve parachute in a backyard if you have to today, right now, safely? Okay. Now, interesting thing just happened, and I hope everybody takes a moment and notices this. When I asked the question about your main parachute, about half the hands went up. When I asked the same question about your reserve, only about 1/5 of the hands went up. How many of you have never flown a reserve parachute? Okay, almost half the room has never flown a reserve parachute. Why do we carry reserves? We carry them as a secondary canopy in case our main parachute malfunctions. They're not sexy, they're not stylish, they're certainly not small parachutes. They're there to save our lives and to return us back down to the ground in one piece, right? That's what we put them in our containers for. But many of us will never actually fly one until when? Until we actually need to use it, right? And we only need to use it when things are going wrong. When things are going bad, our stress level's up, our anxiety level's up. We're probably not landing on the drop zone because we're low. We just had a traumatic experience of a main parachute. And now guess what? At 1,000 feet, we're learning to fly a life-saving device for the first time in a live, practical application. Sounds great, doesn't it? We're setting up a recipe for success, or are we? Okay, but let's keep going. We'll get back to that. Okay, those of you that raised your hand for the reserve parachute, are you sure you can land a parachute in a backyard? Do you have the confidence? And this is the most tame one I could find to put on here. There was a lot worse out there. Okay, so here we have a broken leg. I put that up there slightly for shock value, but really just to get everyone's attention. The purpose of this presentation today is to prevent your injury. I do not want to see any of you next year and have you show me a picture like this. We're here to prevent ourselves from being that statistic, the person that finds himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, under the wrong parachute, and ends up getting injured. Because we can't skydive like this. And nobody wants to stop skydiving, especially for an injury. So what we're trying to do here today is prepare ourselves for these scenarios that we can hopefully avoid or correct if we find ourselves in those situations. So the question is, are you flying the right model and size parachute for the skydiving that you were doing and your currency level? Do you guys skydive year-round here? Try to, right? But do you have periods of currency and uncurrency where you jump a lot and then you don't jump because it gets cold and the sun disappears for 6 months at a time? Okay. Again, show of hands. How many of you feel you are flying the right model parachute, the right size parachute, and your current with the type of skydiving you're doing today, right now? Okay? Most hands are going up. Interesting. But how many of you guys didn't put your hands up when I asked about the main parachute earlier? A lot. Reserve too, right? Well, what was the difference? How can we answer yes or no on one question and yes on the other one? Okay. Are you sure you're jumping the right parachutes, the right size, and the right currency level? Okay, this is an airfield in western Nepal that an aircraft hadn't even been in there in 20 years. We put a helicopter in there. There's a 750-foot cliff here that if we missed the drop zone, we were in a river that was an offshoot of a glacier, moving pretty fast. I had 2 parachute choices. My Velocity 96, awesome, or my boring Storm 120, the not-so-cool parachute. Which one did I jump in there? Why?
Because you feel more confident under the 120 and you've got more escape routes with the 120.
It was a better choice, exactly. It was a better choice based on size, model, and my skill level, my currency, to put that parachute than my Velocity 96. I wanted to be landing at 25 miles an hour, not 45 miles an hour. I didn't want to swoop off the side of the runway and end up in a river. I thought about it before I put myself in that situation. and I made, to my ability, the best choice I could for that jump. I picked the right parachute for that situation. But bringing us back to the why main parachutes, half the room wasn't comfortable landing a main parachute in the backyard, but that same group of people raised their hands when asked if they're jumping the right parachute, right size, based on their currency. Hands went up. This is the same question that I just asked you. The only difference is in this situation, something went wrong. You're not landing back in the primary landing area. You had to make an evasive maneuver because another parachute has cut you off at 50 feet. You had a reserve ride and you're not landing on the field. You have to land in a parking lot. So the difference in the answers, yes or no, is that you guys were interpreting the first question that everything was going correctly, everything was going right. It's when things go wrong, that's when we find that the parachutes that are over our head, the importance of having the right parachute is what counts, what makes the difference. We can get away with a lot when the conditions are right, but it's when things go poorly that we have difficulty getting away with bad decisions. And has anybody in this room gotten injured skydiving under a parachute? Were things going right or wrong when you got injured? Wrong, right. We never get injured. We never get injured when things go right. It's when things go wrong. And that's what I want you guys to think about. The context of the environment that we place our parachutes in. I was very fortunate to have worked for Performance Designs and have 2 parachutes. Not everybody has 2 parachutes, I get that, and I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I do a lot of traveling too. Sometimes I go work in locations that are next to cities. If anybody's ever been to Skydive Ireland in Kilkenny, it's right outside the actual 300-year-old city or 400-year-old city of Kilkenny. There's nowhere to land off the drop zone. Boston, Massachusetts is a tight location, lots of trees, lots of forest. I typically jump larger, slower parachutes in those locations for landing off in parking lots. I say, can I land this on a football field? Or I guess you guys would call it a soccer field. I get that backwards. Football field. Can I land on a football field? If I go to Arizona, where I have 3 radial miles in every direction in the desert, I can jump a higher performance parachute with more confidence because I know landing off isn't as much of a trauma as it would be in a tight location like in Ireland or in Boston or in the woods or in the forest. So every destination I go to, I kind of go through a mental checklist. Does my parachute fit the location I'm jumping in? And if I can't say yes, I have to expect things are going to go wrong. I fix the situation and try to put a parachute in my pack tray that best suits the conditions that I'm in. Okay, so for those of you that have answered yes to all my questions, there's 1 or 2 of you in the room that I think had their hand up in every question. Awesome. You guys can go to sleep now. This presentation's for the rest of you. And actually, congratulations for good planning. You actually have the same mindset that I do, that I've developed, and that is making sure you have the right tools for the right conditions. But for the rest of you, fear not. I'm not here to sell you a parachute. I'm not here to scare you, and I'm not here to convince you to stop skydiving. I'm here to illustrate areas that you can improve on, your currency, your education, and the answer might actually be sell this parachute and put a different parachute in there. It might be put in a different model, a different size, a larger canopy, maybe even a smaller canopy. Whatever it is, if you leave here with a plan to make sure you can answer all those questions yes next year when I come back to do this again, that I will have considered this hour a success for us together, having spent this time having the conversation. All right, and we still don't have our TV back. We don't need it just yet, but we're going to need it soon. So basically what I want to talk to you guys about today are a few different topics. The first one is we're going to talk about different parachute designs. Then I'm going to talk to you about the structural advancements in the parachutes that we're jumping today. Then we're going to talk about the number of cells in the parachutes, kind of like how big the engine is, 7-cell, 5-cell, 9-cell. We're going to talk about...
Calling someone though.
Okay, awesome. We're going to talk about wing loading. What is wing loading? What does that mean to you guys?
The ratio between the surface of the wing and the total exit weight.
How much weight we have over the parachute, under the parachute, and how big the parachute is in combination. Okay, we're going to talk about wing loading. Okay, we're going to talk about component compatibility, making sure we have the right parachutes in the right combination in our harness container. We're going to talk about canopy coaching, and last but not least, we'll talk about canopy maintenance. All right, so with parachute designs, there's basically 4 different designs for parachutes. There is fully elliptical. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of those. Can you give me an example of a fully elliptical parachute? Can someone give me a correct example of a fully elliptical? Can someone give me an example of a fully elliptical parachute?
Velocity.
Velocity, absolutely, yep. Okay. Next would be semi-elliptical. What about a semi-elliptical parachute? Sabre 2, awesome. The PD lineup of parachutes actually works really well for this. My favorite parachute design, it's a phrase that I coined, it's called the fully unelliptical parachute, otherwise known as the square parachute. It's got all 4 corners. What's an example of a fully unelliptical square parachute? A Manta, a Navigator, student parachutes. They're not actually square, but they're pretty close. And then tapered designs. There's old school tapered canopies. We don't see a lot of them anymore. The stiletto might be an example of one where they literally just cut at a 45-degree angle the tail of the parachute off to give it a higher performance increase. Older technology, but people are still buying it. What would you think the difference is between a Velocity and a Sabre 2 in terms of its degree of ellipticalness? If you throw a number out there, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5 degrees, 10, 15, would it be drastic?
They're almost identical.
Okay, it's a couple of degrees. It's really not a big difference between a Sabre 2 and a Velocity in terms of its ellipticalness. So there, I just said it. If you were to look down on both parachutes from above and you had just the outline of each parachute, you would be hard-pressed to tell which one was which. That degree of ellipticalness is so little, it's so minimal, because there's so many other things involved in the parachute design beyond just its shape. But those are the things we look at, the major keywords: elliptical, taper, that sort of thing. So the idea is that square, square, fully unelliptical canopies are the slowest performance parachutes. There's more parachute to put into the air for the turn. Semi-elliptical, we're starting to take the brakes off, and fully elliptical, we have a high-performance fast parachute. Is that a fair assumption? Based on common knowledge of the different performance levels. So if we're a low experienced jumper, are we looking at fully elliptical parachutes as our first parachute? Probably not. If we're a moderate experienced skydiver, semi-elliptical may be the right place for us to be because it's given us a little more fabric overhead. It's slowing down the decision-making process. We're not able to make as radical of turns as we can with fully elliptical. We know there's other things involved, but these are just the basic structures of the parachutes. Where would you want a fully elliptical parachute? What would be a good discipline to have a fully elliptical canopy? CP pilots? What about semi-elliptical? Any wingsuit jumpers out here? Would it be better to have, say, semi-elliptical than fully elliptical for jumping wingsuits? Why is that?
You don't have a chance to go into a spin.
There's more corner to the canopy, so it's more likely to stay on heading, right? It's less likely to have an off-heading opening. One of my friends in Australia, Aussie the Aussie, he jumps a katana with his wingsuit, and it drives me nuts because he's a great packer, so he never has off-heading openings. He's the contradiction to the rule. Everybody else has bad openings, and he jumps the most highly elliptical, non-cross-brace parachute with a wingsuit, and he still has good openings. I don't like that. Doesn't help my argument here. But that being said, there's different shapes of parachutes, and you should be understanding why you're using the types of parachutes you are, the shapes of them, based on the types of skydiving you're doing. Now, what about structural advancements? There's still old gear out there. Anybody jumping a main canopy over 15 years old? Do you survive when you use it? It still works, right? Older parachutes still work, so we have older designs. We also have newer designs out there. So not only are we dealing with differences in size and shape, we're dealing with differences in technology and age. Different ages had different technological goals. So we have different types of parachutes that perform based on the technology we had at that time. We further apply that to our main and reserve canopies. We have drastic advancements in main parachutes. Originally, we had square parachutes, 3 or 4 different manufacturers that all built basically the same parachute. They all used basically the same material, F111, or low permeability fabric. F111 was like the Coca-Cola, the name of it. Reserve parachutes have largely stayed the same, or have they? What's the big transition in reserve parachutes over the years? Low bulk, right? All the parachute manufacturers are looking to make smaller reserves. How do you make a low bulk reserve? Material. You start pulling out fibers and eventually it gets thinner, right? How many you pull out before it doesn't work? That's the question. That's why those guys make all that money. It's like having a 600 thread count versus 300 thread count in your sheets. The less threads, the thinner the fabric is, but that's another conversation for another time. Point is, we have different types of main parachutes, different types of reserve parachutes, old ones, new ones. There's over 1,000 different combinations of canopies you could pick to put into harness containers in that other room over there. Between Sunpath and UPT and Aerodyne and all the harness container manufacturers, if you take all the different harness container sizes they offer, the Micron, the V3, the Odyssey, Aerodyne, what is it, Icon, all these different harness containers, all the different canopies, mains and reserves that'll fit into each of those different containers, there's thousands of combinations. What you have to ask yourself is, based on the harness container you have on your back, do you have the best combination for your skydiving, both in form, function, and in compatibility? How many of you guys would agree that you have the right canopies in your container right now? Okay. Good. You should be confident in the gear that you're using. All right, and then lastly here, fabric lines and design. In the early days of skydiving or ram air canopies, we had Dacron and we had Kevlar. Dacron was spongy and tension knotted. Kevlar was strong and didn't stretch. Neither one of them were great lines for long-term use. PD invented microline. They invented Spectraline back in the 1990s, I believe, sometime in the 90s. But even Spectra had its problems because it shrunk, right? The friction of the slider going down would shrink the lines. Now Vectran and HMA are the lines of choice. So we have all these different choices for canopies that complement the different designs. So educating yourself on the different models, shapes, lines, and parachutes, it's a lifelong process, but it's one that I hope you guys will take time on your downtime and look at, because the more you know about the parachute's design and how they're built, the more likely you are to understand what's best for you in your skydiving. So let's talk about cells and other stuff. Some of the first ram air parachutes were 5 cells. Big, poofy 5 cells. It was like flying a square cloud back down to the ground. They didn't drive forward very fast. They didn't descend very fast. They didn't flare very well. And then 7 cells came out. And then 9 cells. And now we're back to 5 cells. Icarus builds a 5 cell for their canopy pilots, the crew guys, crew dogs. So 5 cells are coming back into fashion. They're retro again. We've got cross-braced canopies and hybrid canopies. A hybrid has 0 porosity on one skin, on the top skin. It's got low permeability, F111 on the bottom skin. It packs lower, doesn't last as long because the low permeability wears out before the ZP wears out. But other than that, they're awesome. Cross-braced canopies. Why do we cross-brace our parachutes? Rigidity. Parachutes are supposed to be rigid. When they start to do this, they become less efficient and eventually they don't create lift. The cross-bracing allows for smaller parachutes. If you took a 100 kg person like myself and put them under a big poofy parachute, it's going to maintain its rigidity. Put me under a small parachute, I'm going to actually bend that parachute. I'm going to deform it because I'm so heavy under it. Unless I put cross-bracing and internal ribs that will keep that parachute structurally sound and rigid. And in doing so, that's what allows the guys and girls out there flying the CP canopies at 3.0 wing loadings and 4.0, these drastic wing loadings, because now the cross-bracing keeps the wing rigid and keeps the airfoil working. If you were to cut all the cross braces out of a Velocity on one of your friends as a joke, and they went to jump it the next morning, the canopy would probably fold up in half because it wouldn't have the rigidity to stay structurally stable. I'm just kidding, don't do that, but just wanted to illustrate the point that the cross bracing is what allows for smaller parachute designs to remain rigid. All right, so here's really the big point here. In the 80s and 90s, parachutes were purpose-built for skydiving. Didn't really matter what you were doing. If you were in FS, you were belly to earth. If you were doing style and accuracy, you had a couple of different designs for accuracy, but canopies were basically just there to get you back down to the ground, to survive. What does my canopy do? It keeps me alive. Well, today, we have so many different disciplines in skydiving. The parachute manufacturers have designed dozens of parachutes to meet the different needs of the different types of skydiving. For students, we have Navigators and Mantas, big, fully unelliptical parachutes that open on heading. They're soft, they're easy to pack, they're durable, they're made out of really rough materials because students abused parachutes and dragged them across the taxiway. We build parachutes specifically for fun jumping, just easy all-around canopies that people don't have to put a lot of thought and effort into. Currency isn't really a big issue with canopies like the Pulse compared to, say, a Katana or even a Storm. We've got videographer-friendly parachutes. What would a videographer-friendly parachute be?
Crossfire.
What's that?
Crossfire.
Why would it be friendly to videographers? What's so friendly about it? It opens soft. And videographers wear
One-heading.
5 kilos of camera helmet on top of their head, so they want nice soft openings. So a soft opening parachute like a Crossfire, you're correct, it's one of the softest opening parachutes in the industry. That or a Storm, any of these soft opening parachutes to prevent the videographer's head from snapping forward with a hard opening. We build parachutes purpose-built for that. Wingsuiting, we have purpose-built wingsuit canopies, right? What are some of those? What are some of the best canopies for wingsuiting? Spectre, Spectre 2, Storm. What's the similarity in a Spectre and a Storm?
Profile.
They're 7 cells. Why would a 7-cell parachute be really good for wingsuiting?
On-heading opening.
Higher probability of on-heading openings. The same reason reserves are 7 cells instead of 9 cells. Gives you a higher probability of an on-heading opening so that you don't have to deal with line twists or diving canopies when they open. We certainly purpose-built canopies for swooping. Petra, Peregrine, Valkyrie, Leia, all these different high-performance parachutes. And demo jumping. We even build specific canopies for demos, similar to accuracy jumping, whether it's taking a classic into a baseball field or a cricket field with a flag. There's different types of parachutes now for pretty much everything you do. So take a second and kind of just think about what kind of parachuting you like to do. I'm a free flyer. I like to go 180 miles an hour. So maybe a soft opening parachute is probably a good thing for me. I like wingsuiting. So maybe a 7-cell is good for me. I'm just kind of building a sight picture of the type of parachute I would want to fly with the type of skydiving I'm doing. And then I might think about that parachute and then think about what I'm currently jumping. And is what I'm jumping suitable for the types of skydiving I'm doing? And I guarantee you a few of you in here quietly saying to yourself, I don't have the right parachute for what I'm doing right now. And that's okay. As long as we recognize that and we do something about it. That's the first step into removing ourselves from the possibility of having an incident from having the wrong parachute over our head. Okay, I mentioned wing loading. There's 4 basic types of wing loading, probably 5 now, but that's how outdated this presentation is. Under 1.0, what would you consider that? 0 to 1.0. Student, someone who just learned how to skydive. 1 to 1.5, novice, moving into intermediate. 1.5 to 2.0, intermediate to expert. And over 2.0, certified badass, right? I've got a 2.2 wing loading. What do you have? 2.3, I'm going to go buy another good deal parachute. I'm going to come back next weekend with 2.4, and so on and so on. We actually now have canopies being jumped at 3.5. It's crazy the weights and the sizes that people are jumping today and the speeds are generating. But that's the evolution of the sport and the evolution of canopies. Okay, all you need to know about with wing loading, only regardless of the different types. When your wing loading goes up, the margin of error goes down. That is true from the day you make your second skydive, if you've changed wing loadings, until you made your 20,000th and second skydive. If you increase your wing loading, your margin for error will go down. But what does that mean? I'm human. I make mistakes. I make a lot of them. I'm really good at making mistakes. I've made a few of them in skydiving. I've made a number of mistakes under parachute. Okay, I'm here to stand up and fess up to the fact that I don't always make good decisions under my parachutes. However, my margin for error is such that when I make those mistakes, I have time to recognize them and correct them before they become incidents, thus far in my life anyway. The majority of accidents that occur with canopies today are when the margin of error disappears. And it's higher loaded parachutes, Katanas at 1.8, Velocities at 2.1, 2.2, Valkyries at 2.6 or 7. The higher the wing loading, the quicker the response is to either the toggle input or the riser input. And the faster the input response, the less time is available for you to recognize you've made a mistake and to put in an auxiliary corrective action. So be mindful of that and be asking yourself, am I at the appropriate wing loading to correct a mistake when I make it? not if I make it, because you will make mistakes. When you make them, will you have enough time to correct them? And if you can answer yes, you're under a good parachute. If your answer is no, or I'm not sure, you might not be under the right parachute for what you're doing. All right, another compatibility, did I misspell that? Sorry. Another component compatibility issue is, I mentioned those thousands of combinations between main canopies, reserve parachutes, and harness containers. Do you want to have a loose-fitting main or a tight-fitting main?
Loose fitted.
Loose, okay. Anybody for tight? How about somewhere in the middle, like a good-fitting main, right? It should fit. There is a canopy size specifically for each of the pack trays, but we're cheap. We don't want to buy another container. We just want another parachute. So we stuff in we stuff in canopies into a container tightly. Then we work our way down to our good fit, but then we get a deal on a really good small parachute. We stick it in the container. It fits loose, and we get away with it for hundreds of jumps until we bump the rig on the door, and that loose pin pops out. Next thing you know, we have an out-of-sequence deployment or a horseshoe malfunction on exit. That being a worst-case scenario. So ask yourself, does my main canopy fit in the deployment bag? There should be some tension when the top flap comes over and the locking stows go through the grommets. There should be some tension. There should be some canopy between the top flap of the bag and your stow. If you can close the bag all the way and there's no tension on the locking stows, that means the lines have a higher likelihood of experiencing line dump on opening. We want tension during the deployment, and if the canopy fits too small in the bag, we lose some of that tension and increase the possibility of a hard opening on deployment. What about reserve canopies? Would you be surprised to know that the current container that you currently have, container you have, you could fit 15 different canopies in there in your reserve tray. You could buy a PD-PR canopy, fit 2 different versions in there. You could buy a PD Optimum, fit 2 different versions in there. That's 4 PD canopies. Then you've got Icarus, 2 more Icarus reserves, 2 more low bulk Icarus reserves, Aerodyne, 2 reserve sizes, 2 low bulk reserve sizes, and so on. And Precision Aerodynamics, there's 15, possibly up to 20 reserve sizes you could fit into your reserve tray. Loose, tight, good fit, low bulk, full bulk. Do you know if you have the right one in there? Is it appropriately sized?
Just adjust the loop.
How many of you guys are riggers? Okay, those of you that aren't riggers, after this course is over, after this seminar is over, go find the riggers, talk to them. It may not be tonight, but you should be taking your harness container, having your rigger look at it and say, do I have the appropriate size main and reserve in this harness container system? If your reserve is too tight and your main is too loose, that could be a problem. If your reserve is too loose and your main is too tight, that could be a problem. And if everything's too tight, it could be a problem. If everything's too loose, that could also be a problem. So I'm giving you guys a lot of problems, and I'm sorry. But there is a good fit. It's a good fit for your main and your reserve, and if you have that good fit, your gear will perform and function to its best capabilities, reducing your incident rate and reducing the possibility of malfunctions. So if you can't answer that question, do I have the right fit, the right component match, please go see your riggers and ask them. And what about AADs? Okay. This was from last year. Okay, that was a year ago. When was the first AAD activation caused by a swoop? About 10 years ago? There's been at least 3 fatalities where people have been killed because their AADs have met the parameters through a swoop. They've come in at over 78 miles per hour, under 750 feet. People have gotten killed. But it's still happening. That, to me, is such a terrible photo to have to project. And it was something on the internet, on dropzone.com. I didn't go out there, and this was put on there by someone else. And I'm glad that it was shared, but how do you fire an AAD on a swoop 10 years after we figured out that it was a possibility and could be fatal? Because you have the wrong combination of equipment, and you're not aware that you have that combination. This individual did not think that a 270-degree turn could generate enough speed on his turn to activate his AAD. Guess what? It did. And it almost cost him his life finding out that he was wrong. I don't want any of you to be found in that situation. Some of the worst incidents that we have out there, regardless of what the actual context is, are the repeated incidents. I don't want to be investigating an incident and start off the investigation by saying, repeat of this incident has happened 3 times. This is now the 4th time in X number of years.
So what's the answer to this question then?
Well, one answer is if you're a high-performance parachutist, you need to know what your descent rates are. You need to, whether it's through a Flytech GPS or bribe your local cop to sit there with a radar gun or a police officer, you need to know if you're close to your approach speeds of these activation speeds. And if you are, both Cypress and Vigil have specific AEDs that are designed for swooping that will not activate below their initiation altitudes once a swoop has been initiated. So getting that information and knowing it ahead of time. And the sad part is about something like this. This is not the last time this is going to happen. I guarantee you we will see another AED activation on a swoop, and hopefully it won't result in a fatality, but it will happen again because information is not passed on. People don't think about the types of skydiving they're doing with the equipment, and we will see this again, and unfortunately again, hopefully we won't lose anyone in the process. So I've given a lot of information about the different types of parachutes. I think we started off with some of the most important observations, and that is that our main parachute is what we fly the most. It's what we're most comfortable and current with. A lot of us don't have much experience with our reserve parachutes. So right off the bat, PD is here. John LeBlanc is here. Albert Birchtold is here. Diedrich is here. Diedrich tours around Europe with reserve parachutes on risers. I beg and plead with you guys, and it's not to sell a PD parachute. I don't care who you buy them from. If you already have a PD parachute or a Icarus or whatever for your reserve, it's irrelevant to me. Go to a boogie, find Diedrich at one of his events, and demo the reserve parachutes. Put 2, 3, or 4, or 5 jumps on it. Imagine your first live reserve ride being in a controlled environment where you're jumping it as a main. You have the ability to plan your landing and feel how it flies and flares at 5,000 feet rather than at 1,500 for the first time. I cannot emphasize that enough. In the US, we do the same thing. We actually send our reserves out on tour in the US, or PD does that, so that jumpers can jump the reserves. If you have an idea of how your reserve flies, you have a greater chance of a successful outcome than having an accident or an incident. With your main parachutes, I don't expect you to go out and buy new parachutes tomorrow, but I do expect that a lot of you will leave this presentation and go get canopy coaching. If you don't feel comfortable landing your main parachute in a parking lot or in a backyard when things go right and when things go wrong, you do not know all there is to know about the parachute you are flying, and there are situations and scenarios that can present themselves that will injure or kill you. Can't make that any clearer. Unless you're comfortable and confident that the parachute you are flying today under good conditions and bad conditions can be landed off safely, you still have something left to learn about flying a parachute. And that's awesome because we never stop learning. I still have stuff to learn about parachutes. You still have stuff to learn about parachutes. We all do. Education is the key. And it's not just about taking a course and walking away. It's about continuing education. This is my friend Bill Morrissey in the United States. His favorite color is pink, go figure. 78 years old. He's turning 78 next month. He took Flight 1's basic course, 101. This pictures him in Flight Course 102, the second course that they offer. He's still taking canopy courses at 78 years old because he still has more to learn. Flying the right parachute, the right size, the right model, and for him even the right color. He's flying the parachute that best fits the type of skydiving that he's doing. He likes to do RW, lands with 20 or 30 other people on big ways. He jumps in Zephyr Hills. They do have some outs, but there are some tight landing areas. So he wants a 7-cell parachute to be able to sink in his landings. And he knows that he can still learn more about flying parachutes despite having 6,000 jumps over a 50-year career. I love the fact he is still getting canopy coaching. So if he can do it, you guys can do it. Because if you get coaching, you will understand more about the parachutes that you're flying. You'll be less likely to find yourself unable to fly that parachute when things go wrong. Because when things go right, it's easy. You could take a Petra tomorrow and land it safely by yourself if there was no outside influence, if there was no turbulence, no air traffic of other canopies, a clean landing area, a soft landing area, no obstacles. You could land just about any parachute out there once under the perfect conditions. But we're not here to talk about perfect conditions. We're not here to illustrate perfect conditions. Injuries only happen when things go wrong. And that's what I want you guys to think about. Okay, how many of you change your oil at 3,000 miles when you're supposed to? Liar. Nobody does. All right, one person that does. When do you change your tires at 40,000 miles or whatever it is? No, you change your tires when they blow, right? When a tire pops, it's time to change it. We treat parachutes just like we treat our cars. We neglect them. The Australians have most of us neglect them. The Australians have a saying, she'll be right. Does anybody know what that means? Have you ever heard that before?
I heard it, but no.
She'll be right means you can get away with it one more time. This closing loop looks like it's frayed. Can I get one more jump on this? She'll be right. I mean, it's going to jump it one more time. These line sets look like they're about to burst. She'll be right for one more jump. But eventually she's wrong. And when she's wrong, the line breaks, the loop breaks, the canopy ruptures, something happens to the gear. Slinks, we have had one fatality and multiple cripplings of skydivers. At least 2 skydivers have been crippled, paralyzed, because their slinks failed. They changed their line sets, but not their slinks. Line set costs $325, slinks cost $25 or $30. They put recycled slinks onto new lines, 2,000 jumps, jumping in the desert. One of the slinks gave out on a high-performance turn, lost the line group at 700 feet, paralyzed. Over a $30 pair of slinks, lack of maintenance, canopy injury. Patches. When do you patch a canopy? A hole that big? Patch a canopy? No, put a little ripstop tape on it. Small patches, small holes become big holes. Okay, if you have a small hole in your canopy, pay to get it patched, get it done when it's a small, manageable process. When it becomes a big, large hole, it becomes more expensive, less aerodynamic for the parachute. And lines, how many of you jump Vectran lines? Not here to sell you on any line type, but Vectran line is phenomenal because it shows wear. HMA and Vectran are basically the same strength, but HMA looks almost brand new after 500 jumps, so you can't really tell how worn it is, whereas Vectran looks like it's about to break in 2 pieces at 500 jumps. You can see all the broken strands and fraying, so that's why a lot of canopy pilots prefer Vectran, because they can see wear and tear. Spectra is awesome, but it requires maintenance in terms of trim because it shrinks. Out of trim parachutes don't perform well. They don't have good bottom end flare. So there's all kinds of little canopy maintenance tips and tricks that you guys can educate yourself on to keep you up to speed and educated with this information. So, as in most things in life, you're either in control or something else is in control. In our context, you're either flying your canopy or your canopy is flying you. You're either ahead of the curve on the parachute or you're behind the curve. And if you're behind the curve, that means the canopy is leading the decision-making process and you're there to react rather than to proactively fly the parachute the way that it needs to be flown. We've all flown parachutes above our skill set. We've all flown parachutes above our currency level. I used to jump in Boston, and owning 2 parachutes of Velocity in a storm, when I came off a winter layoff in April, I didn't jump right back on my Velocity because it was really fast and really dangerous. I would put 100 jumps on my Storm to get recurrent before jumping my Velocity so that I wasn't taking that first jump of the first day back with the highest performance parachute I owned. Safety day is one of the most dangerous days to skydive in the US. Do you guys have safety day here? Somebody always gets injured on safety day because they spent all winter skiing. Safety day is their first day back and they grab their rig with their 84 square foot Velocity they haven't jumped in 5 months, and they go up and they hook themselves in the snow. It happens. We want to try to avoid that. So whether it's currency, whether it's the size, the model of the parachute, the types of skydiving that you're doing, ask yourself under canopy every time, am I flying this parachute or is this parachute flying me? Am I in control of the descent rate or is this parachute putting me somewhere I don't want to be? We can get away with it. We've all gotten away with a bad choice here or there. But if you get away with a bad choice, the worst thing you can do is go back up and do it again. Because what's the definition of insanity? Do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. If you get away with a bad choice, stop and reassess and think about what you're doing and change something so that it's not going to happen in the future. So my theme with all of this was something I created when I was at PD. It was a marketing campaign called Knowledge is Power. The 3 most dangerous words in skydiving are I didn't know. I didn't know this wasn't the right parachute for the kind of skydiving I do. I didn't know that line set was prone to breaking while still looking really good like HMA. I didn't know that a semi-elliptical parachute was better for me than a fully elliptical parachute for jumping wingsuits based on the statistics. Whatever that piece of information is, there's something out there you don't know that will make you smarter and ultimately make you safer. There's something out there for all of you, I guarantee it. But your job is you got to go find it. I can present some ideas and some information, hopefully encourage you guys, but you have to take that information and go back and do more work, do the homework. Within the context of the US, we have USPA and our Skydivers Information Manual. The BPA has something similar, I believe, for you guys. No? Okay, if not, the SIM is available for free. Download that from USPA. Social media, all the manufacturers are on social media. You can ask them questions. You can learn more about the parachutes and the harness containers and the training. And YouTube is a great resource for training aids. PD spent tens of thousands of dollars on educational materials, on making videos, how to change your line sets, canopy inspection, how to fly the different parachutes. Find that information. Find that one piece of information that might make you that much safer on your next jump. Yeah, so like I say, practice what you preach. So this is actually up in Nepal. This is 12,350 some odd feet above sea level. That's our little village. And you know what we're jumping up there? We're jumping Navigators and Silhouette 260s, okay? Amazingly. And the reason why I put this in here, it's not to brag that I get to skydive in Nepal, although that is pretty cool. My friend Ozzy the Aussie Khan from Australia. Ozzy flew the first wingsuit in Nepal a couple years ago. And we jump out of a helicopter, and our landing area is actually right here. It's a big flat location, great for landing at that altitude. And I handed Ozzy a harness container for his first wingsuit jump in Nepal. And in that harness container was a Silhouette 260. And he said, well, Tom, that's kind of a big parachute. And he'd already seen some canopies come in and land in the landing area. And he had already jumped a 210 on the flat landing area. He said, why are you giving me such a big parachute? I said, because I'm in charge, that's why. Don't ask, just take, if you want to skydive, you're going to jump with this 260. But it's so big. Okay. Gets up, hops in the helicopter, takes off. First wingsuit jump, exit 26,000 feet. He exited somewhere over here, down the valley. And on the video, it's great. You watch the wings inflate, and instead of starting to go forward, what happens? He just like a base jump, you know, he just straight down for 1,000 feet before he finally picks up airspeed because he had a 40-knot hover when he exited. Ozzy ended up landing right here on the side of a hill, okay? He had an awesome, safe landing. And the difference in his mind and in my mind after the fact was he had the right canopy over his head for not when things went right, when he was landing here in the flat runway area, but I knew there was a potential with a wingsuiter. I mean, wingsuiters land off everywhere. I knew there was a huge potential that my friend, someone I cared very much about, both professionally and as a friend, could land on a ridgeline that had no flat ground, trees to navigate around, rocks, boulders, and so I gave him, in my mind, what was the best tool for the job. Had I given him the 210, and this is what he said to me afterwards, he probably would have gotten injured with the 210 because he would have come in faster, had less flare, potentially got hurt. But with the 260, he walked away with a smile and a great story to tell people. So I practice what I preach. So I'm not here to stand on a soapbox and say, do this, do this, do this. I think about these things all the time because I don't want to get injured skydiving. I'm a full-time skydiver. It's what I do for a living. It's how I pay my bills and how I put food on my table. And if I'm laid up with a broken ankle, I can't do my job. So because I travel so much and I go to different drop zones in different countries and different locations, high and low, mountains, water, whatever, I always ask myself, am I jumping the right parachute for the right conditions, the right location, and my currency level? And if I can't say yes, I don't do it. I'll either find a parachute to borrow that better fits what I need to do, or I'll stand down on the jump. Some of my skydives that I'm most proud of are the ones I didn't make. I like to tell people that. The ones where I realized that the equipment that I had and my currency level and what I was doing did not match. It was not a good choice to make that skydive, so I stood down. I lived to skydive another day. My goal is when I come back next year, and I hope to come back next year, that you guys will find me if we're not doing the same presentation again, and I want your answer next year to be yes for all 4 questions that I asked. Can you land your main and your reserve in a backyard? Every hand should go up for your main and your reserve, and then when things are going well. And then more importantly, when things are going wrong, can you land your main and your reserve in that same backyard? The goal should be yes for all 4 questions. When things go right and when things go wrong, are both parachutes in my harness container going to give me the best chance for a successful, safe, injury-free landing? If you can't say yes today, I want you to walk out of here, leave this facility, go find a canopy coach. I threw a few names up there, whether it's Flight One, Alter Ego, Greg Windmiller, Brian Vatcher. You guys probably have a heap of well-qualified guys and girls here in the UK. Get the education. Learn to fly your parachutes better and safer than you can today. And if you can do that, you will drastically reduce the chances of injury next year or the year after as a skydiver. Canopies are where we're going to get hurt in the future. So give yourself the best equipment over your head based on what you're doing and the best knowledge on how to use that gear. And you will find yourself on the side of skydiving injury-free, making fun skydives and not sitting laid up with a broken ankle because you found yourself in the wrong spot at the wrong time with the wrong gear and the wrong currency. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm here all night until about 10 or 11. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them for you now as a group, or if you want to find me one-on-one, if you don't want to share your canopy concerns in a group setting. I flew from Florida to share this information. This was the one presentation I really wanted to give because I care so much about it. So I hope you guys took a lot out of it, and if I can answer any questions for you, I'm here to help. And thank you for your time.